In the glittering ballrooms of Victorian London, where titles and fortunes determined one's very existence, there lived a young woman who had learned to become a shadow. But shadows, as fate would have it, are most visible in the brightest light. And on one fateful evening, beneath 1,000 candles, a duke looked past the diamonds and silk and saw her. If you're listening to this story, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments which part of the world you're listening from. I want to know how far it has traveled. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of Ashford House, casting long shadows across the Persian carpets that lined the drawing room. Eleanor Hartley stood perfectly still beside the marble fireplace, her hands folded demurely before her, her eyes cast downward in the practiced pose of invisibility she had perfected over 3 years of service. She was 22 years old, with chestnut hair pulled back in a simple chignon, and grey eyes that held depths of intelligence she had learned to conceal. Her dress was of good quality but deliberately plain, a soft dove grey that allowed her to blend into the background of any room. This was her purpose after all, to be present but unseen, useful but unnoticed. "Eleanor, fetch my shawl," Lady Beatrice Ashford commanded without looking up from her embroidery. "The blue cashmere, not the green." "Yes, my lady," Eleanor murmured, moving silently from the room. Lady Beatrice, at 19, was everything Eleanor was not. Or rather, everything Eleanor had once been before misfortune stripped away her birthright. Golden-haired, blue-eyed, and possessed of a substantial dowry, Beatrice was the jewel of the season, courted by every eligible gentleman in London. She was also Eleanor's distant cousin, though this connection was never acknowledged in public. When Eleanor's father, a country gentleman of modest means, had died suddenly, leaving nothing but debts, it was Lady Ashford who had offered Eleanor a position as companion to her daughter, a charity that came with the unspoken price of complete subservience. As Eleanor climbed the grand staircase to Beatrice's chambers, she allowed herself a moment to remember her own childhood, the small manor house in Derbyshire, her father's library where she had spent countless hours reading philosophy and poetry, her mother's gentle laugh before illness claimed her. Those memories felt like dreams now, belonging to another girl entirely. She retrieved the shawl and returned to find the drawing room transformed into a hive of activity. Lady Ashford, a formidable woman with iron-grey hair and sharper eyes, stood at the centre, directing servants with military precision. "The Duke of Thornfield arrives tomorrow," she announced, her voice ringing with triumph. "He has requested a private audience with Beatrice. This is it, my dear. Your destiny approaches." Beatrice's face flushed with pleasure. "The Duke himself? Mother, do you truly think he means to propose?" "Why else would he request such a meeting? You have captivated him completely, as I knew you would. The Thornfield title is one of the oldest in England, and his estate in Yorkshire is magnificent. You will be a duchess, my darling." Eleanor draped the shawl around Beatrice's shoulders, her movements automatic. She had heard much of the Duke of Thornfield, Alexander Blackwood, 30 years old, recently returned from managing his northern estates. He was said to be intelligent, reserved, and impossibly wealthy. Society whispered that he was finally ready to take a wife, and every ambitious mother in London had thrust her daughter into his path. "Eleanor, you will accompany Beatrice tomorrow, of course," Lady Ashford said, finally acknowledging her presence. "You will sit in the corner and occupy yourself with needlework. You are to be silent and unobtrusive. The Duke must see Beatrice as she will be, a lady of consequence, properly attended." "Yes, my lady." That evening, as Eleanor helped Beatrice prepare for bed, the younger woman chattered endlessly about her future. "They say Thornfield Manor has 70 rooms," Beatrice said, admiring herself in the mirror, "and the Duke keeps a stable of the finest horses in England. I shall have my own carriage, of course, and a lady's maid who knows the latest French fashions. Perhaps I shall even be presented at court again, this time as a duchess." Eleanor brushed Beatrice's golden hair with steady strokes, saying nothing. She had learned long ago that her opinions were neither sought nor welcomed. "You must think me very fortunate," Beatrice continued, meeting Eleanor's eyes in the mirror, "to have such prospects when you have none. But then, that is the way of the world, is it not? Some are born to shine and others to serve." "You are indeed fortunate, my lady," Eleanor replied quietly. Later, alone in her small room on the 3rd floor, barely larger than a closet, Eleanor sat by the narrow window and looked out over the London streets. Gaslight flickered below, and she could hear the distant sounds of carriages and laughter. Somewhere in this vast city, the Duke of Thornfield was preparing for tomorrow's meeting, unaware that his decision would seal not just Beatrice's fate, but Eleanor's as well. For if Beatrice married, Eleanor would go with her as companion, spending the rest of her days in the shadow of another woman's happiness. It was not a future she had chosen, but it was the only future available to a penniless gentlewoman with no family to claim her. She opened the small book she kept hidden beneath her pillow, a volume of Wordsworth's poetry, the last remnant of her father's library. In the margins, in her own careful hand, she had written her thoughts and observations, the only place where her true self could exist. "I wandered lonely as a cloud," she read softly, "that floats on high o'er vales and hills. Tomorrow the Duke would come. Tomorrow Beatrice's golden cage would transform into a palace, and Eleanor would remain what she had always been, invisible, forgotten, a ghost in her own life." She closed the book and extinguished her candle, but sleep was long in coming. Something in her chest felt tight, as though the walls of her small room were closing in. She told herself it was merely anxiety about the important day ahead, but deep within, a part of her she had tried to silence whispered a different truth. She was suffocating in this half-life, and she did not know how much longer she could endure it. The clock in the hall struck midnight, and Eleanor finally drifted into uneasy dreams where she ran through endless corridors, searching for a door that would lead her back to herself. The Duke of Thornfield arrived at precisely 3 o'clock, as promised. Eleanor watched from her designated corner as he was shown into the drawing room, and despite her determination to remain detached, she found herself studying him with unexpected interest. He was tall, with dark hair touched with grey at the temples, and eyes of such deep blue they appeared almost black in certain lights. His face was strong-featured, handsome in a severe way, with a mouth that suggested both intelligence and restraint. He moved with the unconscious grace of a man comfortable in his own authority, yet there was something in his bearing that spoke of weariness, as though he carried burdens invisible to others. "Your Grace, what an honour!" Lady Ashford gushed, her curtsy so deep it bordered on theatrical. "May I present my daughter, Lady Beatrice Ashford?" Beatrice rose with practised elegance, her rose-coloured gown perfectly chosen to complement her complexion. "Your Grace," she murmured, her eyes demurely lowered. The Duke bowed. "Lady Beatrice, thank you for receiving me." Eleanor bent her head over her embroidery, her needle moving in steady rhythm. She was furniture, she reminded herself. A chair, a table, nothing more. "Please sit," Lady Ashford said, gesturing to the settee. "Eleanor, tea." Eleanor set aside her needlework and moved to pour tea from the silver service, her movements quiet and efficient. As she handed the Duke his cup, their fingers brushed briefly, and she felt an unexpected jolt, like touching something charged with electricity. She stepped back quickly, returning to her corner. "I trust your journey from Yorkshire was pleasant, Your Grace?" Lady Ashford inquired. "Tolerable," the Duke replied. His voice was deep, cultured, with a slight northern accent that softened certain vowels. "Though I confess I am always glad to return to London despite its crowds." The conversation continued in this vein, polite, superficial, exactly as society demanded. Beatrice performed her role flawlessly, laughing at appropriate moments, expressing interest in the Duke's estates, demonstrating her knowledge of music and art. Eleanor had to admit her cousin was skilled at this particular game. Yet something seemed off. The Duke's responses were correct but distant, and his gaze occasionally drifted, not rudely, but as though his thoughts were elsewhere. Once, Eleanor looked up from her embroidery to find him staring directly at her. Their eyes met for a heartbeat before she quickly looked away, her cheeks warming. After an hour, the Duke rose. "Lady Ashford, Lady Beatrice, I wonder if I might impose upon your hospitality further. I'm hosting a small gathering at Thornfield House tomorrow evening, a dinner party for select friends. I would be honoured if you would attend." Lady Ashford's eyes gleamed with triumph. "We would be delighted, Your Grace." "Excellent. Until tomorrow, then." He bowed and departed, leaving behind a wake of barely suppressed excitement. The moment the door closed, Lady Ashford seized Beatrice's hands. "You see? He is clearly smitten. A private dinner party. This is where he will propose, I am certain of it. We must prepare immediately. Your blue silk gown, I think, with the sapphire necklace your father gave you." The following evening, Eleanor helped Beatrice dress with particular care. The blue silk was indeed magnificent, and with her hair arranged in elaborate curls and the sapphires glittering at her throat, Beatrice looked every inch a future duchess. "You will accompany us, of course," Lady Ashford told Eleanor. "You will sit with the other companions and ladies' maids in the servants' dining room. I want you nearby in case Beatrice needs anything." Thornfield House was a magnificent Georgian mansion in Mayfair, ablaze with light. Eleanor followed the Ashfords through the grand entrance, then was quietly directed by a footman to the servants' quarters below stairs. She spent the evening in a plain room with several other companions and maids, eating a simple meal and listening to gossip about their employers. Hours passed. Eleanor occupied herself with a book she had brought, trying not to wonder what was happening in the glittering rooms above. Finally, near midnight, a maid burst into the room, her eyes wide with scandal. "You'll never believe what's happened," she gasped. "The Duke of Thornfield has announced his engagement, but not to Lady Beatrice." Eleanor's heart stopped. "What?" "It's true. He proposed to Miss Cordelia Fairfax, Lord Fairfax's daughter, right there at dinner, in front of everyone. Lady Beatrice fainted dead away, and Lady Ashford looked ready to murder someone. They're saying the Duke never had any intention of courting Lady Beatrice. He was interested in Miss Fairfax all along, and used the dinner party to make his intentions clear." Eleanor set down her book with trembling hands. This was disaster, complete, utter disaster. She hurried upstairs, propriety forgotten, and found chaos. Beatrice was being supported by 2 footmen, her face blotchy with tears, while Lady Ashford stood rigid with fury. Other guests whispered behind their fans, their expressions ranging from pity to barely concealed glee. "How dare he?" Lady Ashford hissed as Eleanor approached. "How dare he humiliate us this way? Everyone believed he was courting Beatrice, everyone, and to propose to that insipid Fairfax girl instead." "Mother, please," Beatrice sobbed. "Everyone is staring." They were indeed. Eleanor could feel the weight of dozens of eyes, could hear the whispers spreading like wildfire. By tomorrow, all of London would know that Lady Beatrice Ashford had been publicly rejected by the Duke of Thornfield. The humiliation was complete and devastating. As they prepared to leave, Eleanor caught a glimpse of the Duke standing with his new fiancée, a pretty blonde woman with a sweet smile. He looked content, even happy. Had he truly been so oblivious to the expectations he had created? Or had he simply not cared? For just a moment his gaze found Eleanor's across the crowded room. Something flickered in his expression. Was it regret? Apology? But then Lady Ashford was pulling them toward the door, and the moment was lost. In the carriage home, Beatrice wept inconsolably while Lady Ashford sat in frozen fury. Eleanor said nothing, her mind racing. This changed everything. Beatrice's reputation was damaged, perhaps irreparably, and Eleanor's own future, tied as it was to her cousin's, had just become even more uncertain. "This is not over," Lady Ashford said suddenly, her voice cold as ice. "We will recover from this. Beatrice will marry well, I will see to it. But that man, that Duke, he will regret treating us with such contempt." Eleanor looked out at the dark London streets and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. She had witnessed something tonight that went beyond mere social embarrassment. She had seen the cruel machinery of society in action, the way it elevated some and crushed others without mercy. And she had seen in the Duke's eyes something she could not quite name, a complexity that suggested there was more to this story than anyone yet understood. But what did it matter? She was invisible, after all. Her observations, her thoughts, her very existence, none of it signified in the grand scheme of things. Or so she believed, as the carriage carried them through the night toward an uncertain future. The weeks following the disaster at Thornfield House were among the darkest Eleanor had ever known. Beatrice took to her bed, refusing to see anyone, while Lady Ashford raged and plotted in equal measure. The scandal had spread exactly as feared. Every drawing-room in London buzzed with gossip about the Duke's shocking proposal and Lady Beatrice's public humiliation. Invitations dried up. Former friends suddenly became unavailable. The Ashfords, once at the centre of society, found themselves increasingly isolated. Eleanor bore the brunt of Lady Ashford's fury. Everything became her fault. The tea was too cold, the curtains too bright, Beatrice's handkerchiefs insufficiently pressed. Eleanor endured it silently as she always had, but something inside her was changing. The tight feeling in her chest had grown into a constant ache, and she found herself gasping for air in the middle of the night, as though drowning in her own life. It was in this state that salvation arrived in the form of a letter, delivered on a grey morning in late autumn. "It's from Aunt Agatha," Lady Ashford said, her tone dismissive. "She's in London for the season and wishes to call upon us." How tiresome. Eleanor's heart leaped. Aunt Agatha, Lady Agatha Pemberton, was Lady Ashford's elder sister, but the two women could not have been more different. Where Lady Ashford was rigid and status-obsessed, Agatha was independent and unconventional. A widow of considerable means, she had scandalized society by choosing to live alone in a fashionable townhouse in Bloomsbury, surrounding herself with artists, writers, and intellectuals rather than the usual society crowd. Eleanor had met her only once, years ago, but she remembered a woman with sharp eyes and a sharper wit, who had looked at her with something like recognition. Lady Agatha arrived that afternoon in a flurry of purple silk and intellectual energy. She was perhaps 60, with silver hair arranged in an elaborate style that somehow managed to look both elegant and rebellious. Her eyes, bright and assessing, swept the drawing-room before landing on Eleanor in her corner. "Good heavens, Constance, is that little Eleanor Hartley? Child, come here where I can see you properly." Eleanor rose uncertainly, aware of Lady Ashford's disapproving frown. She approached and curtsied. "Lady Pemberton, it's an honour to see you again." Agatha studied her with unnerving intensity. "You've grown into a lovely young woman. You have your mother's eyes. I knew her, you know, before she married your father. A woman of considerable intelligence, wasted on country life." She turned to her sister. "What are you doing with her, Constance? She looks half-starved and completely miserable." "Eleanor serves as companion to Beatrice," Lady Ashford said stiffly. "She is adequately cared for." "Adequately? Adequately?" Agatha's eyebrows rose. "The girl looks like a ghost. Where is Beatrice, anyway? I heard about the unfortunate business with Thornfield. Dreadful situation, but hardly the end of the world." Lady Ashford's face tightened. "Beatrice is indisposed. The humiliation has been considerable." "Humiliation," Agatha snorted. "The Duke chose another woman, it happens. Better to discover his preference now than after a miserable marriage. But I didn't come to discuss Beatrice's wounded pride. I came with a proposition." She turned back to Eleanor. "I'm hosting a literary salon next week. Poets, philosophers, a few progressive thinkers. I need someone with intelligence to help me organize it. Someone who can actually hold a conversation about something other than the weather and who's marrying whom. I want Eleanor." The room fell silent. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. "That's quite impossible," Lady Ashford said coldly. "Eleanor's duties are here. Her duties are to waste away in a corner while you treat her like a servant. Constance, the girl is a gentlewoman, however reduced her circumstances. She deserves better than this half-life you've imposed on her. Agatha's voice softened slightly. I'm not suggesting anything permanent. Lend her to me for a month. Let her assist with my salon, meet some interesting people. Breathe air that isn't thick with your disappointment and rage. If she wishes to return afterward, so be it. Eleanor held her breath. She didn't dare look at Lady Ashford, didn't dare hope. And what, Lady Ashford said icily, do I tell people when they ask where my daughter's companion has gone? Tell them the truth, that she's assisting her aunt with a cultural endeavour, or tell them nothing. Frankly, my dear sister, given your current social standing, I doubt many will ask. The barb hit its mark. Lady Ashford's face flushed, but she was trapped. Refusing Agatha would create more scandal, more gossip. And perhaps, Eleanor thought, Lady Ashford was simply tired of having a constant reminder of her own charity in the house. Very well, Lady Ashford said finally. 1 month, but Eleanor will return when summoned. Excellent. Pack your things, child. We leave within the hour. Eleanor could barely believe what was happening as she gathered her few possessions. Her plain dresses, her precious books, the small miniature of her parents. When she descended the stairs with her worn carpet bag, Beatrice emerged from her room for the first time in weeks. You're leaving? Beatrice's voice was small, almost childlike. You're abandoning me? Eleanor felt a pang of guilt, but it was overwhelmed by a surge of something else, anger perhaps, or simply the will to survive. I'm not abandoning you, Beatrice. I'm accepting an opportunity. Surely you understand that. An opportunity? Beatrice's eyes narrowed. To do what? Sit in some dusty room with Aunt Agatha's peculiar friends, discussing books no one cares about? You're a fool, Eleanor. You belong here, with me. You have no other place in this world. The words were meant to wound, and once they would have. But standing there with her bag in hand and freedom beckoning, Eleanor felt something shift inside her. Perhaps, she said quietly, it's time I found one. Lady Agatha's townhouse in Bloomsbury was a revelation. Unlike the oppressive formality of Ashford House, it was filled with light, colour and life. Books lined every wall, paintings hung in cheerful profusion, and the air smelled of fresh flowers and possibility. Your room is on the 2nd floor, Agatha said, leading Eleanor up a graceful staircase. It overlooks the garden, small, but I think you'll find it comfortable. Small? The room was twice the size of Eleanor's closet at Ashford House, with a proper bed, a writing desk positioned by the window, and shelves waiting to be filled. Eleanor set down her bag and felt tears prick her eyes. Thank you, she whispered. I don't know how to thank you. Agatha's expression softened. Thank me by remembering who you are, child. You're Eleanor Hartley, daughter of Thomas Hartley, one of the finest scholars I ever knew. You have his mind and your mother's grace. The world tried to make you forget that, but I won't let it succeed. She paused at the door. Rest today. Tomorrow, we begin your education in living. That night, Eleanor sat at the writing desk and looked out over the moonlit garden. For the first time in 3 years, she felt as though she could breathe. The tightness in her chest had eased, replaced by something fragile and tentative, hope. The following days passed in a blur of activity. Agatha's salon was scheduled for Saturday evening, and there was much to prepare. But the preparation itself was a joy. Eleanor helped arrange the drawing room, selected readings from contemporary poets, and even contributed her own thoughts on which philosophical topics might spark the most interesting discussions. You have excellent instincts, Agatha observed. This is what you should have been doing all along, engaging your mind, not burying it. On Friday afternoon, Agatha took Eleanor shopping, not for the plain, serviceable dresses of a companion, but for something more befitting a young woman of intelligence and taste. They chose a gown of deep emerald green, simple in design but beautifully cut, that brought out the colour of Eleanor's eyes and complemented her chestnut hair. There, Agatha said with satisfaction. Now you look like yourself. Saturday evening arrived, and with it, Agatha's guests. Eleanor had expected elderly academics and stern philosophers, But the reality was far more diverse. There were poets in their 30s, a female novelist who wrote under a male pseudonym, a professor of natural sciences from Cambridge, and several other intellectuals of varying ages and backgrounds. Among them was a man who immediately caught Eleanor's attention, not because he was handsome, though he was, in an unconventional way, but because of the intensity of his focus when others spoke. He was perhaps 35, with brown hair that fell over his forehead, intelligent hazel eyes, and the slightly rumpled appearance of someone who cared more for ideas than fashion. "Eleanor, allow me to introduce Dr. James Whitmore," Agatha said. "James is a physician and philosopher. He runs a charitable clinic in the East End while writing treatises on social reform. James, this is my niece, Eleanor Hartley." Dr. Whitmore bowed. "Miss Hartley, Agatha has told me much about you. She says you have a keen mind and a love of Wordsworth." Eleanor felt herself flush. "I'm fond of the romantic poets, yes. Then we shall have much to discuss. I find their emphasis on emotion and nature to be a necessary corrective to excessive rationalism, though I suspect you have your own views on the matter." And just like that, they were deep in conversation. Eleanor found herself discussing poetry, philosophy, and social reform with an ease she had forgotten she possessed. Dr. Whitmore listened to her opinions with genuine interest, challenged her when he disagreed, and praised her insights when they aligned. "You should write," he said at one point. "Seriously, I mean. Your observations on the intersection of individual liberty and social responsibility are quite sophisticated. Have you considered publishing?" Eleanor laughed, though the idea sent a thrill through her. "I'm hardly qualified to publish philosophical essays, Dr. Whitmore." "Why not?" "Because you're a woman. Because you lack a university degree. Some of the most important thinkers of our age have been autodidacts. What matters is the quality of the thought, not the credentials of the thinker." As the evening progressed, Eleanor felt herself unfurling like a flower long kept in darkness. She contributed to discussions, laughed at witty remarks, and even offered a few of her own. Several guests sought her out specifically, wanting to hear her thoughts on various topics. It was near midnight when she noticed a late arrival being shown in by Agatha's butler. Her breath caught. It was the Duke of Thornfield. He stood in the doorway, his dark evening clothes impeccable, his expression unreadable. His gaze swept the room and stopped when it reached Eleanor. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other across the crowded space. Then Agatha was at his side, greeting him warmly. "Alexander, I'm so glad you could come. I know you've been busy with your new engagement." "Lady Pemberton," he said, his deep voice carrying across the room, "thank you for the invitation. I apologize for my tardiness." "Not at all. Come, let me introduce you to everyone, though I suspect you may already know some of our guests." As Agatha led him around the room, Eleanor tried to focus on her conversation with Dr. Whitmore, but she was acutely aware of the Duke's presence. What was he doing here? Did he know she would be present? And why did her heart race at the mere sight of him? "Miss Hartley," Dr. Whitmore's voice broke through her distraction. "Are you quite well?" "Yes, forgive me. I was just surprised to see the Duke of Thornfield. I didn't realize he moved in such intellectual circles." Dr. Whitmore followed her gaze. "Thornfield? Oh yes, he's been attending Agatha's salons for years. Brilliant mind, actually. He's particularly interested in agricultural reform and estate management practices that benefit tenant farmers. Not your typical aristocrat." He paused. "Do you know him?" "Only slightly," Eleanor said, which was true. She knew of him, had served him tea, had been present at his engagement announcement. But she didn't know him. Not really. Yet as the evening continued, she found herself watching him. He engaged in serious discussion with the Cambridge professor, debated social reform with Dr. Whitmore, and listened intently to the novelist's views on women's education. He was, Eleanor realized, genuinely interested in ideas, not as aristocratic affectation, but as true intellectual curiosity, and several times she caught him watching her. Finally, As the evening was winding down, he approached her directly. "Miss Hartley, I hope you'll forgive the intrusion, but I wanted to speak with you." Eleanor's mouth went dry. Up close, he was even more imposing, tall, broad-shouldered, with those impossibly blue eyes that seemed to see far too much. "Your Grace, I owe you an apology," he said quietly, "for the distress caused to your household. I handled the situation poorly." Eleanor blinked in surprise. "You owe me no apology, Your Grace. I was merely present." "You were more than present. I saw your face that evening. You understood the implications immediately, the damage that would be done, and I suspect you've borne some of the consequences, however unfairly." He paused. "Lady Pemberton mentioned you're staying with her now. I'm glad. Ashford House was not conducive to your well-being." The observation was so unexpected, so perceptive, that Eleanor found herself speechless. He had noticed her, truly noticed her, not just as furniture but as a person. "I should let you return to your other guests," the Duke said, "but I hope we might speak again. I would value your perspective on some of the topics discussed this evening. You have an interesting mind, Miss Hartley." He bowed and moved away, leaving Eleanor standing alone, her thoughts in turmoil. "Well," Agatha said, appearing at her elbow with a knowing smile. "That was illuminating." "I don't know what you mean," Eleanor said, though her burning cheeks betrayed her. "Don't you? My dear child, the Duke of Thornfield, engaged to be married, mind you, just sought you out specifically to apologize and compliment your intellect. That's not nothing. It's courtesy, nothing more. Perhaps." Agatha's eyes twinkled. "Or perhaps it's the beginning of something far more interesting. Time will tell." That night, back in her comfortable room, Eleanor tried to make sense of the evening. She had been seen, truly seen, for the first time in years. Dr. Whitmore had encouraged her to write. The Duke had apologized and called her mind interesting. It was too much, too overwhelming. She told herself not to hope, not to imagine possibilities that couldn't exist. The Duke was engaged. She was nobody, a penniless companion with no prospects. Yet as she drifted off to sleep, she couldn't help but remember the way he had looked at her, as though she mattered, as though she existed beyond the shadows. And for the first time in 3 years, she allowed herself to wonder, what if there was more to life than mere survival? What if she could actually live? The month Eleanor had been granted stretched into 6 weeks, then 2 months. Lady Ashford sent increasingly terse notes demanding her return, but Agatha deflected them all with practiced ease. Beatrice had recovered enough to resume limited social activities, and a new companion had been hired. Eleanor, it seemed, was no longer essential to the Ashford household. She should have felt guilty. Instead, she felt liberated. Under Agatha's guidance, Eleanor blossomed. She attended more salons, met writers and thinkers, and even began writing herself essays on literature and philosophy that Dr. Whitmore encouraged her to submit to progressive journals. To her amazement, 2 were accepted for publication, albeit under the initials E.H., to avoid the prejudice against female authors. Dr. Whitmore became a regular presence in her life. He called frequently, always with some new book to discuss or idea to debate. He was kind, intelligent, and clearly interested in more than just intellectual companionship. Agatha approved of him wholeheartedly. "James would make an excellent husband," she said one afternoon as they took tea in the garden. "He has a good income from his practice, a respectable position, and he values your mind. You could do far worse." "He hasn't proposed," Eleanor protested, though she knew it was only a matter of time. Dr. Whitmore's attentions had become increasingly particular. "He will. The question is, what will you say?" Eleanor didn't know. Dr. Whitmore represented security, respect, and genuine affection. A marriage to him would be comfortable, intellectually stimulating, and far better than returning to her previous half-life. She should be grateful, she should be eager, yet something held her back. A restlessness she couldn't name, a sense that accepting him would be settling for safety rather than reaching for something more. The Duke of Thornfield had become a regular attendee at Agatha's salons. He and Eleanor developed an easy rapport, discussing everything from agricultural reform to Gothic literature. He was, she discovered, far more complex than she had initially believed. A man burdened by responsibility, genuinely concerned for his tenants' welfare, and possessed of a dry wit that occasionally broke through his reserved exterior. His engagement to Miss Cordelia Fairfax proceeded according to society's expectations. The wedding was set for late spring. Eleanor told herself she was happy for him, that the strange flutter in her chest when he entered a room meant nothing. She was lying, of course, but some lies are necessary for survival. In late February, Agatha announced she was hosting a grand winter ball, not the usual intimate salon, but a proper society event with dancing, dinner, and over 100 guests. "It's time you re-entered society properly," Agatha declared. "Not as a companion, but as my niece, a young woman of good family and considerable intellect. We'll show London that Eleanor Hartley is not to be dismissed or forgotten." Eleanor's first instinct was to refuse. The thought of facing the people who had ignored her, who had witnessed her humiliation by proxy, filled her with dread. But Agatha was insistent, and Dr. Whitmore added his encouragement. "You have nothing to be ashamed of," he said earnestly. "You're accomplished, intelligent, and lovely. Let them see who you truly are." The night of the ball arrived cold and clear. Eleanor dressed with trembling hands in a gown of deep sapphire blue that Agatha had insisted on commissioning, far finer than anything she had ever worn, even in her father's day. Her chestnut hair was arranged in an elegant style, and Agatha lent her a simple pearl necklace that had belonged to their grandmother. When Eleanor looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. The pale, invisible companion had vanished, replaced by a woman who looked confident, even beautiful. "Perfect," Agatha said with satisfaction. "Now remember, you are my niece, my equal. You bow to no one except royalty, and you certainly don't apologize for existing. Understood?" Eleanor nodded, though her stomach churned with anxiety. The ballroom was magnificent, ablaze with candlelight and filled with the cream of London society. Eleanor descended the grand staircase on Agatha's arm, acutely aware of the eyes turning toward them, the whispers beginning. "Is that Eleanor Hartley, the Ashford companion? She looks completely different. What is she doing here? Lady Pemberton has taken her under her wing, apparently. How extraordinary!" Eleanor lifted her chin and forced herself to smile. She would not shrink. She would not disappear. Dr. Whitmore appeared at her side almost immediately, offering his arm. "Miss Hartley, you look radiant. May I have the honor of the first dance?" She accepted gratefully, and as they took their positions for the waltz, she felt some of her anxiety ease. Dr. Whitmore was an excellent dancer, and his steady presence gave her confidence. As they moved across the floor, she became aware of the attention they were drawing, some curious, some approving, some distinctly hostile. Lady Ashford stood near the refreshment table with Beatrice, both watching with expressions of barely concealed outrage. Beatrice looked pale and drawn in a gown of insipid pink, her earlier vivacity dimmed by weeks of social exile. When their eyes met, Beatrice's gaze was venomous. "Don't let them disturb you," Dr. Whitmore murmured. "You owe them nothing." After the dance, Eleanor was surrounded by Agatha's friends, the novelist, the Cambridge professor, several progressive thinkers who engaged her in lively conversation. She found herself laughing, debating, actually enjoying herself. This was what life could be, she realized. This was what she had been missing. Then she saw him. The Duke of Thornfield stood at the entrance to the ballroom, Miss Cordelia Fairfax on his arm. She was lovely in white silk, her blonde hair arranged in perfect ringlets, a diamond necklace glittering at her throat. They made a striking couple, exactly what society expected of a duke and his future duchess. Yet as Eleanor watched, she noticed something odd. The Duke's attention wasn't on his fiancée. His gaze swept the room systematically, as though searching for something, or someone. When his eyes found Eleanor, he went completely still. She couldn't read his expression from across the crowded room, but she felt the intensity of his focus like a physical touch. For a long moment they simply stared at each other, the noise and movement of the ball fading into insignificance. Then Miss Fairfax tugged on his arm, saying something, and the spell broke. He looked down at his fiancée, nodded, and began making his way through the crowd, greeting guests as protocol demanded. "Miss Hartley?" "Doctor." Whitmore's voice brought her back to the present. "Are you quite all right? You seem distracted." "Forgive me. I'm simply overwhelmed by all of this." "Of course. Would you like some air? The terrace is quite pleasant." Before she could answer, a familiar voice cut through the conversation around them. "Eleanor, how unexpected to see you here." Lady Ashford stood before them, Beatrice at her side. Up close, Eleanor could see the lines of strain around her former employer's mouth, the brittleness in her smile. "Lady Ashford, Beatrice." Eleanor curtsied with exactly the depth appropriate for her station. No more, no less. She was not a servant anymore. "I wasn't aware you'd been invited," Lady Ashford continued, her tone suggesting this was a grave oversight. "I thought you were still in my sister's employ as, what was it, an assistant of some kind." "Eleanor is my niece and my guest," Agatha said, appearing at Eleanor's elbow like an avenging angel. "As you well know, Constance, and she's not employed by anyone. She's a gentlewoman of good family, exactly as she's always been." Beatrice's eyes narrowed. "How convenient that you've suddenly remembered your family connections, Eleanor. When you were living under our roof, you seemed quite content to be a servant." And the words stung, but Eleanor kept her voice steady. "I was grateful for your family's charity when I had nowhere else to turn. But circumstances change, as I'm sure you understand." "Circumstances?" Beatrice's laugh was sharp. "Is that what you call it? You've certainly risen in the world. New gowns, society balls, gentlemen callers." Her gaze flickered to Dr. Whitmore with unmistakable disdain. "Though I suppose one must take what one can get, Dr. Whitmore stiffened, but before he could respond, another voice joined the conversation. "Lady Beatrice, Lady Ashford, what a pleasure to see you both." The Duke of Thornfield had materialized beside them, Miss Fairfax still on his arm. His expression was perfectly polite, but Eleanor detected something sharp beneath the courtesy. Lady Ashford's face transformed into a mask of strained civility. "Your Grace, Miss Fairfax, how delightful." "Indeed." The Duke's gaze moved to Eleanor, and something flickered in his eyes. Warmth? Recognition? "Miss Hartley, I hope you're enjoying the evening." "Very much, Your Grace. Lady Pemberton has been a most gracious hostess. She has excellent taste in guests." He paused, then added with deliberate emphasis, "I've been following your published essays with great interest. Your analysis of Wordsworth's political evolution was particularly insightful. I hope you'll continue writing." The silence that followed was profound. Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from the sheer unexpectedness of the compliment. The Duke of Thornfield had not only read her work, but remembered it well enough to comment specifically. Lady Ashford's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Beatrice looked as though she'd been slapped. "You're too kind, Your Grace," Eleanor managed. "Not at all. Intellectual merit should be recognized, regardless of the author's circumstances." His tone made it clear he was delivering a subtle rebuke to the Ashfords. "Dr. Whitmore, I believe we met at Lady Pemberton's salon last month. Your work in the East End is admirable." "Thank you, Your Grace," Dr. Whitmore said, clearly surprised by the Duke's attention. Miss Fairfax, who had been silent throughout this exchange, finally spoke. "Alexander, darling, you promised to introduce me to Lord and Lady Hartwell, shall we?" "Of course." The Duke bowed to the group. "If you'll excuse us, Miss Hartley, I hope we might continue our discussion of your work at a future salon." As he walked away with his fiancée, Eleanor felt the weight of multiple stares. Lady Ashford looked apoplectic. Beatrice's face had gone white with fury. Even Dr. Whitmore seemed taken aback. "Well," Agatha said with barely suppressed glee, "that was illuminating. "How dare he?" Beatrice hissed, her voice low and venomous. "How dare he acknowledge her like that, as though she were someone of consequence? She's nothing. A charity case, That's quite enough, Beatrice," Lady Ashford snapped, though her own expression was murderous. She turned to Eleanor. "I don't know what game you're playing, Eleanor, but it won't work. You may have fooled my sister and attracted some misguided attention, but society has a long memory. You're still the penniless girl who served as my daughter's companion. A few pretty dresses and published essays won't change that." "Perhaps not," Eleanor said quietly, "but they've changed how I see myself, and that, Lady Ashford, is what truly matters." She turned and walked away, Dr. Whitmore at her side, leaving the Ashfords staring after her. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Eleanor danced, conversed, and played her part with growing confidence. But she was constantly aware of the Duke's presence, the way his gaze found her across the room, the tension that seemed to crackle in the air whenever they were near each other. Near midnight, she slipped out onto the terrace for a moment of solitude. The winter air was cold and sharp, clearing her head. She leaned against the stone balustrade and looked up at the stars, trying to make sense of the tumultuous emotions swirling inside her. "Miss Hartley!" She spun around. The Duke stood in the doorway, alone, his face half in shadow. "Your Grace, I didn't hear you approach. Forgive me, I didn't mean to startle you." He stepped onto the terrace, maintaining a respectful distance. "I wanted to speak with you privately. What I said earlier, about your essays, I meant it. You have a genuine gift for analysis and expression. Thank you. I'm surprised you even knew they were mine. I published under initials. Lady Pemberton may have mentioned it." A slight smile touched his lips. "She's quite proud of you, you know, as she should be." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. "I don't understand why you're being kind to me. After what happened with Beatrice. What happened with Lady Beatrice was my fault, not yours. I should have been clearer about my intentions from the beginning. I allowed assumptions to form because it was easier than being direct. That was cowardice, and you suffered for it." He paused. "I've thought about that evening often, about the look on your face when the announcement was made. You weren't surprised for yourself. You were calculating the damage to others. That kind of empathy is rare. I was merely being practical. You were being compassionate. There's a difference." He moved closer, and Eleanor's breath caught. "Miss Hartley, Eleanor, I need to tell you something I should have said months ago." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Your Grace, you're engaged. This isn't appropriate." "I know. God help me, I know." His voice was rough with emotion. "But I can't continue this charade without at least speaking the truth once. That first day when I came to Ashford House, I barely noticed Lady Beatrice. But you, sitting in the corner with your embroidery, trying so hard to be invisible, you were all I could see. Your intelligence, your grace, the sadness in your eyes. I couldn't stop thinking about you." Eleanor's world tilted. "That's impossible. I was nothing. I am nothing. You were never nothing. You are extraordinary, and I was a fool not to see it sooner, not to act on it when I had the chance." He ran a hand through his hair, destroying its careful arrangement. "I proposed to Miss Fairfax because she was suitable, because it was expected, because I thought I could forget you. But I can't. Every salon, every conversation, every time I see you, it becomes harder to pretend." "Then why?" Eleanor's voice broke. "Why did you propose to her if you felt this way?" "Because I'm a coward, because I thought duty mattered more than happiness, because I didn't believe someone like you could ever care for someone like me." He laughed bitterly. "And now it's too late. I'm engaged, the wedding is planned, and I have no honourable way to extricate myself without destroying Miss Fairfax's reputation." Eleanor's mind reeled. This couldn't be happening. The Duke of Thornfield, engaged, respectable, far above her station, was confessing feelings for her on a moonlit terrace, like something from a novel. "What do you want from me?" she whispered. "Nothing. Everything. I don't know." He stepped back, as though physically restraining himself. "I want you to know the truth. I want you to understand that when I look at you, I see everything I should have chosen. But I also want you to be happy. Dr. Whitmore is a good man. If he offers for you, you should accept. Don't let my mistakes ruin your chance at a real life. And what about your life? Your happiness? I'm a duke. Happiness is a luxury I can't afford." His smile was devastating in its sadness. "But knowing you exist, knowing you're in the world being brilliant and brave, that will have to be enough." He bowed formally, the gesture at odds with the raw emotion in his voice. "Good night, Miss Hartley. Forgive me for speaking so freely. It won't happen again." He turned and walked back into the ballroom, leaving Eleanor alone with the stars and the impossible truth. The Duke of Thornfield loved her, and she, God help her, loved him back. But love, as she was learning, was not always enough to overcome the rigid structures of society, duty, and honor. She stood on the terrace for a long time, shivering in the cold, trying to understand how her life had become so complicated. A few months ago, she had been invisible, forgotten, resigned to a half-life in the shadows. Now she was published, courted, and loved by a man she could never have. When she finally returned to the ballroom, Dr. Whitmore was waiting. "There you are. I was beginning to worry. Are you well? You look pale." "I'm fine, just needed some air." "Miss Hartley, Eleanor, there's something I need to ask you." He took her hand, his expression earnest. "I know this may seem precipitous, but I can't wait any longer. You must know how I feel about you. Your intelligence, your character, your strength. You're everything I've ever wanted in a partner. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Eleanor looked at him, kind, steady, offering her everything she should want. Then her gaze drifted across the room to where the Duke stood with Miss Fairfax, his face a mask of polite attention, while his eyes held nothing but emptiness. She thought about duty and happiness, about settling and reaching, about living in the shadows versus stepping into the light, even if that light burned. "Dr. Whitmore," she said slowly, "you honor me more than I can express, but I cannot give you an answer tonight. I need time to think, to be certain I can offer you what you deserve. Will you grant me that?" Disappointment flickered across his face, but he nodded. "Of course. Take all the time you need. My feelings won't change." But as Eleanor looked once more at the Duke, she knew with terrible certainty that everything was about to change. The question was whether she had the courage to face what came next. The weeks following the ball were torturous. Eleanor tried to focus on her writing, her studies, the comfortable routine she had built with Agatha, but the Duke's confession haunted her, replaying in her mind during sleepless nights. Dr. Whitmore called regularly, patient and understanding, waiting for her answer. The rational part of Eleanor knew she should accept him. He offered security, respect, and genuine affection. A marriage to him would be everything a woman in her position could hope for, but her heart refused to cooperate. The Duke stopped attending Agatha's salons. Eleanor told herself it was for the best. Seeing him was agony, knowing they could never be together. Yet his absence felt like a wound that wouldn't heal. Then, in early March, scandal erupted. Miss Cordelia Fairfax eloped with a captain in the Royal Navy. The news spread through London like wildfire. The Duke's fiancée had run away with her childhood sweetheart, a man her family had deemed unsuitable. She left behind a letter explaining that she couldn't marry without love, that she hoped the Duke would forgive her, and that she wished him happiness. Society was in uproar. The Duke had been jilted twice in one season, first by implication with Beatrice, now explicitly by his actual fiancée. The gossip was merciless. Eleanor heard the news from Agatha, who appeared in her room one morning with a newspaper and an expression of barely contained excitement. "Read this," she commanded, thrusting the paper at Eleanor. Eleanor's hands trembled as she scanned the article. "Oh no, poor Miss Fairfax. The scandal will be terrible." "Poor Miss Fairfax," Agatha laughed. "The girl did exactly what she should have done, chose love over duty. And she's freed Alexander in the process." Eleanor's heart stuttered. "Freed him? Don't play coy with me, child. I've seen the way you two look at each other. I've watched him become more miserable with each passing week. And I know something happened at my ball. You've been different since that night." Agatha sat on the edge of the bed. He loves you, doesn't he? Eleanor couldn't deny it. It doesn't matter. He's a duke. I'm nobody. You're Eleanor Hartley, published author and brilliant thinker. You're my niece and a gentlewoman of good family, however reduced your circumstances. Most importantly, you're the woman he loves. That matters more than any title. Society will never accept it. Society, Agatha said firmly, can go hang. The question is, do you love him? Eleanor closed her eyes. Yes. God help me, yes. Then what are you waiting for? For him to come to me if he chooses. I won't chase after a duke like some desperate fortune hunter. If he wants me, he knows where to find me. But days passed, then a week, and the duke didn't come. Eleanor heard through Agatha's network that he had retreated to his Yorkshire estate, refusing all visitors, dealing with the scandal in solitude. Dr. Whitmore, meanwhile, pressed gently for an answer. Eleanor, I understand you need time, but I must know. Is there someone else? If your heart is engaged elsewhere, please tell me. I would rather know the truth than live with false hope. His directness deserved honesty. Eleanor met his gaze and said quietly, There is someone, but it's impossible. He's far above my station, and there are circumstances that make any connection between us unthinkable. Dr. Whitmore's expression grew pained. The Duke of Thornfield. Eleanor's silence was confirmation enough. I see. He stood, moving to the window. I suspected as much. The way he looked at you at the ball, the way you looked at him. He turned back to her. Eleanor, I won't pretend this doesn't hurt, but I want you to be happy, even if that happiness doesn't include me. If there's a chance for you with him, you should take it. There is no chance. He hasn't even contacted me since Miss Fairfax's elopement. Perhaps he's waiting for the scandal to die down, or perhaps he's afraid. Men of his station often are. They're so bound by duty and expectation that they forget they're allowed to choose their own happiness. He took her hand gently. Don't let fear or pride keep you from what you truly want. Life is too short for such regrets. After he left, Eleanor sat alone in the drawing room, her thoughts in turmoil. What did she truly want? A safe marriage to a good man, or a chance at something more, even if that chance seemed impossibly remote? The answer came to her with sudden clarity. She wanted to live, truly live, not merely survive. And that meant being brave enough to reach for what she wanted, even if she failed. That evening, she sat at her writing desk and composed a letter. Not to the Duke, that would be too forward, but to herself. She wrote about her journey from invisible companion to published author, about finding her voice and her courage, about learning that she was worth more than society had told her. When she finished, she felt lighter, as though she had shared a weight she hadn't known she was carrying. The next morning, Agatha burst into the breakfast room, waving another letter. He's back in London. Alexander returned last night. Eleanor's heart leaped. How do you know? Because he sent me this, asking if he might call this afternoon. He wants to speak with you. The hours until the Duke's arrival were the longest of Eleanor's life. She changed her dress 3 times, unable to decide what to wear. Finally, Agatha intervened, selecting a simple gown of pale green muslin that brought out the color of Eleanor's eyes. You look beautiful, Agatha said. Now breathe. Whatever happens, remember that you are enough exactly as you are. When the Duke was announced, Eleanor's hands were trembling. He entered the drawing room looking thinner than she remembered, with shadows under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. But when his gaze found hers, something in his expression softened. Miss Hartley, thank you for seeing me. Your Grace. She curtsied, acutely aware of Agatha's presence in the corner, ostensibly reading but clearly listening to every word. I apologize for my absence these past weeks. I needed time to think, to plan, to ensure I could do this properly. He took a deep breath. I've spent my entire life doing what was expected of me. I became Duke at 21 when my father died, and since then, every decision has been made with duty in mind. Who I associated with, how I managed my estates, whom I considered marrying, all of it dictated by responsibility and expectation. He moved closer, his eyes never leaving hers. But Miss Fairfax's elopement taught me something. She chose love over duty, happiness over expectation. She was brave enough to reach for what she truly wanted. Consequences be damned. And I realized, I've been a coward. You're not a coward, Eleanor said softly. I am. Because I knew months ago what I wanted, and I chose the safe path instead. I proposed to a woman I respected but didn't love because it was appropriate. I attended salons and watched you shine, knowing I had no right to approach you. I confessed my feelings on a terrace and then ran away like a frightened boy. His voice dropped. I'm done being a coward, Eleanor. Her breath caught at his use of her Christian name. I know I have no right to ask this. I know society will talk, that there will be scandal, that people will say terrible things about both of us. I know I'm offering you a life of scrutiny and judgment, where every move you make will be watched and criticized. He took her hand, his touch sending electricity through her. But I'm asking anyway. Eleanor Hartley, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? The room seemed to spin. Eleanor was aware of Agatha's sharp intake of breath, of the Duke's hand trembling slightly in hers, of her own heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. I have nothing to bring to such a marriage, she whispered. No dowry, no connections, no... You bring yourself, your intelligence, your courage, your compassion. You bring the possibility of genuine happiness, of a partnership based on mutual respect and affection. You bring everything that matters. His eyes searched hers. I'm not asking you to be a duchess in the traditional sense, to simply look beautiful and produce heirs. I'm asking you to be my partner, my equal, my companion in every sense of the word. I want to discuss philosophy with you over breakfast, debate social reform with you in the evenings, and fall asleep beside you knowing I chose love over duty. Tears spilled down Eleanor's cheeks. The scandal will pass. It always does. And in the meantime, we'll face it together. He smiled, and it transformed his face. I'm not saying it will be easy. There will be people who cut us, who whisper behind their fans, who question your suitability. But there will also be people like Lady Pemberton, like Dr. Whitmore, like all the friends you've made who see your true worth. We'll build our own society, Eleanor, one based on merit and character rather than birth and fortune. Eleanor looked at this man, this Duke who had seen her when she was invisible, who had read her essays and remembered them, who was offering her not just his title, but his heart. She thought about Dr. Whitmore's kind face, about the safe life she could have had. Then she thought about the Duke's words on the terrace. Don't let my mistakes ruin your chance at a real life. This was a real life. Complicated, scandalous, uncertain, but real. Yes, she said, her voice steady despite her tears. Yes, I'll marry you. The Duke's expression was one of pure joy. He raised her hand to his lips, kissing it with a reverence that made her heart ache. You've made me the happiest man in England. Agatha erupted from her corner with a most undignified whoop. Finally! I thought you two would dance around each other forever. Alexander, you're a fool for taking so long, but I'm glad you came to your senses eventually. The Duke laughed, a genuine, unguarded sound Eleanor had never heard from him before. Thank you, Lady Pemberton, for everything, for taking Eleanor in, for giving her the space to become who she was meant to be, for not giving up on either of us. Someone had to show some sense, Agatha said tartly. Now, I assume you'll want to marry quickly, before society has too much time to work itself into a frenzy. As quickly as possible, the Duke agreed. Special license, small ceremony. I don't want to give anyone the opportunity to interfere. The next weeks were a whirlwind. The Duke obtained a special license, and they were married in a quiet ceremony at Agatha's townhouse, with only a handful of close friends present. Dr. Whitmore attended, his expression bittersweet but genuinely happy for Eleanor. The Cambridge professor served as witness, and the novelist wept openly throughout the brief service. The scandal, as predicted, was immediate and vicious. The newspapers had a field day. Duke marries penniless companion. Thornfield's third attempt at matrimony. From servant to duchess. A modern fairy tale or cautionary tale? Lady Ashford and Beatrice were apoplectic. They sent a scathing letter that Eleanor read once and then burned, refusing to let their bitterness touch her happiness. But there were also supporters. Agatha's intellectual circle rallied around them, as did several progressive members of the aristocracy who admired the Duke's willingness to marry for love. Letters of congratulation arrived from unexpected quarters, from tenants on the Yorkshire estate who had benefited from the Duke's reforms, from fellow reformers who saw the marriage as a blow against rigid class structures. On their wedding night, as Eleanor stood in the Duchess's chambers at Thornfield House, rooms that had been redecorated according to her tastes, filled with books and writing materials, she could hardly believe this was her life. The Duke, Alexander, as she was learning to call him in private, came to her and took her hands. "Are you happy?" "Terrified," she admitted. "But yes, happy. Deliriously, impossibly happy." "Good, because I intend to spend the rest of our lives ensuring you stay that way." He kissed her forehead gently. "We leave for Yorkshire tomorrow. I want to show you your new home, introduce you to the people whose lives you'll be helping to improve. I want to start our real life together, away from London's gossip and judgment." "Our real life," Eleanor repeated, savouring the words. "I like the sound of that." As she fell asleep that night in her husband's arms, Eleanor thought about the girl she had been, invisible, forgotten, resigned to a half-life in the shadows. That girl was gone, transformed by courage and love into someone who could stand in the light. The journey had been painful, the obstacles seemingly insurmountable, but she had survived. More than survived, she had flourished. And this, she realized, was only the beginning. 6 months after their wedding, Eleanor stood at the window of Thornfield Manor's library, looking out over the Yorkshire moors. Autumn had painted the landscape in shades of gold and amber, and the air carried the sharp, clean scent of approaching winter. Behind her, Alexander worked at his desk, reviewing estate accounts. This had become their routine, mornings spent in companionable silence, each occupied with their own work, occasionally reading passages aloud or asking for opinions. It was, Eleanor thought, the most perfect form of intimacy she could imagine. Life at Thornfield Manor had exceeded her wildest expectations. The estate was indeed magnificent, a sprawling Elizabethan manor with 70 rooms, extensive grounds, and a working farm that employed over 100 people. But what made it truly special was the way Alexander had transformed it from a traditional aristocratic estate into something more progressive. He had built a school for tenant farmers' children, where Eleanor now taught literature 3 days a week. He had implemented profit-sharing schemes that gave workers a stake in the estate's success. He had opened the manor's extensive library to anyone who wished to use it, and Eleanor had started a women's reading circle that met weekly in the drawing room. The local gentry had been scandalized, of course, the Duchess of Thornfield teaching common children, allowing farmers' wives into the manor house. It was unheard of, inappropriate, a dangerous blurring of class boundaries. Eleanor didn't care. For the first time in her life, she was doing work that mattered, using her education and abilities to make a real difference. The children's faces when they mastered a difficult passage, the women's growing confidence as they discussed ideas they'd never been encouraged to explore, these were worth more than any society's approval. Her writing had flourished as well. She had published a collection of essays on women's education that had been surprisingly well received, even by some conservative critics. She was currently working on a longer piece about social reform, drawing on her experiences both as a companion and as a duchess, two perspectives that gave her unique insight into the rigid structures that governed English society. "You're thinking very hard about something," Alexander said, coming to stand beside her. "Should I be worried?" Eleanor smiled. "I was just reflecting on how much has changed. A year ago I was invisible. Now I'm teaching, writing, actually making a difference in people's lives. It feels almost unreal." "You were never invisible. The world just wasn't looking properly." He wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. "I'm so proud of you, Eleanor. Everything you've accomplished, the way you've transformed this estate. You've made Thornfield a home, not just a house." "We've done it together," she corrected. "Your reforms made it possible. I'm just helping to implement them. You're doing far more than that, and you know it." He kissed the top of her head. "Speaking of which, I have news. Lord Hartwell has invited us to speak at a parliamentary committee about estate reform. He thinks our model could be implemented more widely, and he wants us to present our findings." Eleanor turned in his arms, eyes wide. "Truly, they want to hear from both of us. They specifically requested you. Your essays have been circulating in reform circles, and several MPs are interested in your perspective on education and women's roles in social improvement." He grinned. "My wife, the political influencer. Who would have imagined?" "Certainly not Lady Ashford," Eleanor said wryly. They had heard through Agatha that Beatrice had finally married, a wealthy merchant's son with more money than breeding. It was a respectable match, but far below what the Ashfords had once aspired to. Lady Ashford had reportedly aged 10 years from the stress of salvaging her daughter's prospects after the Thornfield debacle. Eleanor should have felt vindicated. Instead, she mostly felt pity. Beatrice had been as much a victim of society's rigid expectations as Eleanor herself, just in a different way. She hoped her former companion had found some measure of happiness, even if it wasn't the fairy tale she had once imagined. "I received a letter from Dr. Whitmore," Eleanor said, changing the subject. "He's engaged to the novelist, Miss Sarah Pemberton. They seem very happy." "I'm glad. He's a good man. He deserved someone who could love him wholeheartedly." Alexander studied her face. "Do you ever regret choosing me? The scandal, the social ostracism, the constant scrutiny?" "Never," Eleanor said firmly. "Not for a single moment. This life, our life, is everything I never dared to dream of. Yes, there are people who cut us, who whisper behind our backs, but there are also people who admire what we're doing, who are inspired by it. We're building something meaningful, Alexander, that matters more than any society's approval. Even when the Duchess of Pemberton refused to acknowledge you at the opera last month," Eleanor laughed. "Especially then. Did you see her face when Lady Hartwell came to our box specifically to invite us to dinner? She looked as though she'd swallowed a lemon. They had indeed found their own society, a circle of progressive aristocrats, intellectuals and reformers who valued ideas over lineage. It was smaller than traditional high society, but infinitely more interesting. Eleanor had genuine friends now, people who saw her as an equal, who valued her opinions and sought her company." A knock at the door interrupted them. Mrs. Henderson, the housekeeper, entered with a smile. "Your Grace, the children from the school are here for their afternoon lesson, and the women's reading circle has arrived early. They're very excited about this week's selection." "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. Tell them I'll be down in a moment." Eleanor turned to Alexander. "Duty calls. Go. Transform more minds. I'll be here when you return, probably buried in agricultural reports and missing you terribly." Eleanor kissed him quickly and headed downstairs, her heart light. The library was already filled with women of varying ages, farmers' wives, shopkeepers' daughters, even a few servants from neighboring estates. They greeted her warmly, without the deference that had once made her so uncomfortable. "Your Grace, we finished Jane Eyre, as you suggested," Mrs. Cooper, the blacksmith's wife, said eagerly, "and we have so many thoughts. The way Jane refuses to be Mr. Rochester's mistress, the way she insists on equality in their marriage, it was quite revolutionary." "Indeed it was," Eleanor agreed, settling into her chair. "Charlotte Bronte was writing about something radical, the idea that women deserve respect and partnership, not just protection and provision. Shall we discuss how that applies to our own lives?" The conversation that followed was lively and passionate. These women, given the opportunity to explore ideas and express opinions, were brilliant. They challenged each other, built on each other's thoughts, and applied literary themes to their own experiences with insight that would have impressed any university don. This, Eleanor thought, was what education should be, not rote memorization of facts, but the development of critical thinking, the courage to question and explore. After the reading circle dispersed, she taught the children, 15 students ranging from 6 to 14, all eager to learn. She had started with basic literacy. After the reading circle dispersed, she taught the children, 15 students ranging from 6 to 14, all eager to learn. She had started with basic literacy, but many had progressed so quickly that she was now introducing them to poetry, history, and even basic philosophy adapted to their understanding. "Miss Eleanor, I mean your Grace," 10-year-old Thomas corrected himself, his face flushing. "Can you read us more Wordsworth, the one about the daffodils?" Eleanor smiled. The children still struggled with her title, often forgetting the formality in their enthusiasm. She didn't mind. In fact, she preferred it. "Of course. But first, I want you to tell me what you think the poem means. Not what you think I want to hear, what you truly think." A small hand shot up. Mary, the shepherd's daughter, spoke shyly. "I think it's about remembering beautiful things when you're sad. Like when my mum died last winter, I remembered the flowers we picked together, and it made the sadness a bit easier." Eleanor's throat tightened. "That's exactly right, Mary." Wordsworth believed that nature and memory could heal us, that beauty stays with us, even in dark times. You understood it perfectly. The girl's face lit up with pride, and Eleanor felt the familiar warmth that came from witnessing a mind expand, a confidence grow. That evening after dinner, Eleanor and Alexander sat in the drawing room, not in the formal arrangement of Duke and Duchess, but curled together on the sofa, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. "I had a letter from Agatha today," Eleanor said. "She's hosting another salon next month and wants us to attend. She says London is finally starting to forgive us our scandalous marriage. Do you want to go?" Eleanor considered. "Yes, I think I do. Not because I need London's forgiveness, but because I miss Agatha. And I want to show them that we're happy, that choosing love over duty didn't destroy us. It made us stronger. Then we'll go. Though I warn you, I intend to monopolize your attention shamelessly and make it abundantly clear to everyone that I'm besotted with my wife." "You already do that here." "True, but it will be more fun with an audience." Eleanor laughed, then grew serious. "Alexander, do you ever regret it? Not the marriage itself, but the cost. You've been ostracized by some of your oldest friends. The prince himself cut you at the last royal function. Your mother still refuses to acknowledge me." Alexander's jaw tightened. His mother, the Dowager Duchess, had been horrified by his choice of bride and had retreated to the dower house, refusing all contact. It was, Eleanor knew, a wound that hadn't healed. "My mother is a prisoner of her own prejudices," he said finally. "I hope one day she'll see reason, but I won't sacrifice our happiness waiting for her approval. As for the prince and the rest, they're welcome to their narrow-minded snobbery. I have everything I need right here." He tilted her face up to his, kissing her with a tenderness that still made her heart race. "You are my choice, Eleanor. Every day, in every way, I choose you. I would make the same decision 1,000 times over." Later that night, as Eleanor prepared for bed, she caught sight of herself in the mirror. The woman looking back at her was almost unrecognizable from the pale, invisible companion of a year ago. This woman had color in her cheeks, confidence in her bearing, and joy in her eyes. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the humiliation, the despair, the slow rebuilding of her sense of self. She thought about Agatha's intervention, Dr. Whitmore's kindness, and Alexander's courage in choosing love over expectation. But most of all, she thought about her own courage, because ultimately she had been the one to accept Alexander's proposal, knowing the scandal it would cause. She had been the one to step into the role of Duchess and transform it into something meaningful. She had been the one to refuse invisibility and claim her place in the world. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Alexander entered already in his dressing gown, his hair charmingly dishevelled. "I have something for you," he said, producing a leather-bound journal from behind his back. "I noticed your old one was nearly full. I thought you might need a new one for your next project." Eleanor took it reverently. The leather was soft and supple, the pages thick and inviting. On the first page, in Alexander's strong handwriting, was an inscription: "For Eleanor, Duchess of Thornfield, who was never invisible, only waiting for the world to open its eyes. May you fill these pages with the brilliance you bring to everything you touch. With all my love, A." Tears blurred her vision. "It's perfect. Thank you." "What will you write in it?" Eleanor thought for a moment, running her hand over the smooth leather. I think I'll write our story. Not as a romance, but as a case study in social reform. How one marriage challenged class structures, how education and opportunity can transform communities, how love and partnership can be revolutionary acts." Alexander's eyes gleamed with pride. "The world needs that story. You should write it. We'll write it together. It's our story, after all." Deal. As autumn deepened into winter, life at Thornfield Manor settled into a rhythm that felt both purposeful and joyful. Eleanor's teaching expanded. She now had 20 students in the school, and the women's reading circle had grown so large they had to move to the manor's ballroom to accommodate everyone. Her writing continued to gain recognition. A prominent London publisher had expressed interest in a full-length book about her educational methods and social reform philosophy. The parliamentary committee appearance had gone better than expected, with several MPs expressing genuine interest in implementing similar programs on their own estates. And through it all, her marriage to Alexander deepened into something richer than mere romance. They were partners in every sense, intellectually, emotionally, practically. They debated, disagreed, challenged each other, and grew together. One December morning, Eleanor woke to find snow covering the moors, transforming the landscape into something magical. She stood at the window, watching the sun rise over the white expanse, and felt a contentment so profound it was almost painful. Alexander joined her, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "What are you thinking about?" "About how far I've come. About the girl I was. Invisible. Forgotten. Convinced she had no value. And about the woman I've become. You were always this woman, Eleanor. You just needed the space and freedom to become her fully. Perhaps, but I also needed you. Your courage gave me courage. Your belief in me helped me believe in myself." She turned to face him. "I know society still whispers about us. I know there are people who will never accept me as a true duchess, but I don't care anymore. I know who I am. I know what I've accomplished. And I know that I'm exactly where I'm meant to be." "And so, as am I," Alexander said softly. "I spent so many years doing what was expected, being who others wanted me to be. You freed me from that, Eleanor. You showed me that duty and happiness don't have to be mutually exclusive, that I could be a responsible duke and a fulfilled man. You gave me permission to live." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the snow fall, each lost in their own thoughts. Eleanor reflected on the strange twists of fate that had brought her here. If Lady Ashford hadn't offered her a position as companion, she never would have been at Ashford House that day when the Duke called. If Beatrice hadn't been humiliated at the engagement announcement, the Ashfords might never have become so unbearable that Agatha felt compelled to intervene. If Miss Fairfax hadn't eloped, Alexander might never have been free to propose. Every painful moment, every humiliation, every dark night of despair, all of it had been necessary to bring her to this place, this life, this love. "I received a letter yesterday," Alexander said, breaking the silence. "From Miss Fairfax. Or rather, Mrs. Captain Morrison now. She and her husband are stationed in India, and she wanted to apologize again for the scandal she caused. She also wanted to thank me for not pursuing legal action or trying to ruin her reputation." "What did you write back?" "I told her she had nothing to apologize for. that her courage in choosing love inspired my own, and I thanked her for freeing me to find real happiness." He smiled. "I also told her about you, about our work here at Thornfield. She wrote back immediately, full of enthusiasm and asking questions about our educational programs. Apparently, she started teaching the children at the military outpost where they're stationed." "I like her," Eleanor said decidedly. "Perhaps when they return to England, we can meet properly. I think we'd be friends." "I think you're right." As winter progressed, Eleanor discovered she was with child. The news filled her with a complex mixture of joy and fear. Joy at the prospect of motherhood, fear that she might not be adequate to the task, that her own unconventional upbringing had left her unprepared. But Alexander was ecstatic, and Agatha, who came to stay for an extended visit, was full of practical advice and emotional support. "You'll be a wonderful mother," Agatha assured her. "You already are to all those children you teach. This will simply be one more child to love and guide. But what if I fail? What if I can't give our child what they need? Then you'll learn and adapt, just as you've done with everything else in your life. Motherhood isn't about perfection, Eleanor. It's about love, patience, and showing up every day. You're more than capable of that." The baby, a girl they named Agatha Margaret, after Eleanor's benefactor and her own mother, was born in early summer, just as the moors burst into bloom with purple heather. She was healthy, loud, and absolutely perfect. Holding her daughter for the first time, Eleanor felt a fierce protectiveness and a determination that this child would never feel invisible, never doubt her worth, never have to fight as hard as Eleanor had to claim her place in the world. "She'll have every advantage," Alexander said, gazing at his daughter with wonder. "Education, opportunity, parents who love each other and her. She'll be able to choose her own path, whatever that may be." "Even if she wants to be a doctor or a lawyer or a politician," Eleanor teased. "Especially then. We'll change the world if we have to make sure she has every opportunity." As little Agatha grew, Thornfield Manor became even more of a haven. The child was doted on not just by her parents, but by the entire estate. The servants who had watched Eleanor transform from uncertain new duchess to confident lady of the manor, the tenant farmers whose children she taught, the women from the reading circle who saw in her a symbol of possibility. Eleanor's book was published to critical acclaim. A companion's perspective, social reform, and women's education became required reading in progressive circles and sparked heated debates in conservative ones. She received invitations to speak at universities, to advise other aristocratic families on estate reform, to contribute to journals and newspapers. The girl who had once been invisible was now impossible to ignore. On their second wedding anniversary, Alexander surprised Eleanor with a gift, a fully equipped study of her own, separate from the library, where she could write without interruption. The walls were lined with bookshelves, a large desk sat before the window overlooking the moors, and comfortable chairs were arranged near the fireplace for reading and thinking. "Your own room," he said. "Virginia Woolf would approve. Every woman writer needs a space of her own." Eleanor walked through the room, touching the books, the desk, the soft curtains. "It's perfect, but you know what makes it truly perfect?" "What?" "That it's here, in our home. That I don't have to choose between being a writer and being your wife, between intellectual pursuits and family life. I can be all of it. Writer, duchess, teacher, mother, partner. I don't have to diminish any part of myself to fit into someone else's expectations." "That's because you've redefined what it means to be a duchess," Alexander said. "You've shown that titles don't have to be prisons, that tradition and progress aren't mutually exclusive. You've changed not just Thornfield, but everyone who's encountered you." That evening, as they sat together in the drawing room, Alexander reading estate reports, Eleanor working on her next essay, baby Agatha sleeping peacefully in her cradle, Eleanor felt a completeness she had never imagined possible. She thought about Lady Ashford and Beatrice, still trapped in their rigid world of social climbing and appearances. She thought about all the other women like her former self, invisible, undervalued, convinced they had nothing to offer. And she made a silent vow. She would continue to write, to teach, to advocate for change. She would use her position and her voice to create opportunities for others, to challenge the systems that kept people trapped in roles they never chose. She would bloom where she was planted, yes, but she would also work to ensure that others had fertile ground in which to grow. The Duke of Thornfield looked up from his papers and caught her eye. Without words, they shared a smile of perfect understanding. Two people who had found each other against all odds, who had chosen love over duty, authenticity over appearance, and in doing so, had discovered what it truly meant to live. Outside, the summer sun set over the Yorkshire moors, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Inside Thornfield Manor, a family built on love and mutual respect settled into the comfortable rhythms of evening, secure in the knowledge that they had created something rare and precious, a life of purpose, partnership, and genuine happiness. Eleanor Hartley, once invisible to all, had become impossible to overlook. But more importantly, she had become impossible to silence. And she intended to use that voice for the rest of her days, speaking for those who couldn't yet speak for themselves, proving that worth was not determined by birth or fortune, but by character, courage, and the willingness to reach for something more. She had been a penniless companion, invisible in the shadows. Now she was a duchess, a writer, a teacher, a mother, and a force for change. But most of all, she was herself, fully, completely, unapologetically herself. And that, she had learned, was the greatest achievement of all. If you've been listening to this story, I hope it has touched your heart and reminded you that your worth is not defined by others' perceptions, but by your own courage to be authentic. Please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel for more inspiring historical dramas, and leave a comment telling me where in the world you're listening from. I'd love to know how far Eleanor's story has traveled and what it meant to you. Thank you for joining me on this journey from invisibility to empowerment, from the shadows to the light.